Hey everybody, it's Peter, and this is the 2025 Kawasaki Vulcan S. Not the Vulcan, that's a whole different model, but the Vulcan S is a sporty cruiser from Kawasaki that has gone relatively unchanged for quite a while. But because it's 2025, we need to talk about what this is in today's market, how it competes, and if it's a good bike for you. So we're filming here at Jim Gilbert's Power Sports. Jim Gilbert's Power Sports is the #1 volume Kawasaki dealer in the country. They have tons of inventory, and if you're nearby, you gotta check them out right now in February. But if you're not nearby, they also give you complete access to their entire product line. So if you have a question about these bikes, I get to come back to them again and again and again. And I've filmed the Vulcan S before, but not for 2025. So let's start at the front. Let's put this in a class. We'll start at the front. We'll go through what this is, and we'll talk about one little interesting detail that I found out that I don't think anybody else is mentioning, and I just found out right now. So that's in this video. If you want to help me out in this video, just do me a favor. The best thing you can do, obviously like, subscribe, that kind of stuff, but just watch to the end. That really helps me out. All right, let's get going with this review. So when I placed this bike in a class, I have faced some criticism. I still call it a cruiser. A cruiser to me is laid out like this. Some people have said to me it has to have a V-twin, it has to have all of these things to be a cruiser. So it doesn't matter what class you want to call it. But to me, it is a cruiser, and for a cruiser, it is quite sporty. It actually it's faster than some old Harley Davidsons, or I say old Harley Davidsons, some of the newer ones are quite powerful, but some of the standard traditional Harley Davidsons are actually slower than this bike. Now this doesn't have the V-twin rumble, it does have the Kawasaki Ninja engine. So what that means is you're not gonna have that traditional feeling of that low revving, high torque engine of some of those big heavy cruisers, but you're gonna get less weight, a more compact powertrain area, which is going to make it a little bit easier to ride than a big heavy cruiser, and you're not going to give up a lot of speed, if any speed. In many cases you will be quicker than some of those bigger, heavier cruisers. This 650 will be faster for sure than Kawasaki's Vulcan 900. This has more horsepower than Kawasaki's Vulcan 900. It has more torque though, so there's a little bit of difference, but this is a decently quick bike, especially for the class. Now, there are some things on this bike that make it good as a cruiser. There are some things that make it a little bit sportier for a cruiser, and there's also some things that make it right for you, no matter what size you are. So we'll talk about all that and more, but let's start at the front wheel and work our way through. So taking a look at the front wheel of this bike, you have a fairly large disc. Now this is a different style disc than on pretty much every other Kawasaki 650 that shares an engine with this. And that's because this one is not the more high performance disc. To go along with that, it doesn't have the second side, like a second disc. Most of the 650 bikes from Kawasaki do. So you have a little bit of a concession to style here. For most people, this is going to make absolutely no difference. They do know, Kawasaki knows that something like a Z650 might end up on the track someday, whereas a Vulcan S, it just isn't going to end up on the track. It's just not going to be something that competes. So you don't need as good braking, although I always like to see more braking rather than less, but this is sort of a hint of what this is. There's a reason this bike can be less expensive than some of the other ones in the lineup, like the Versus 650, for instance. It does have a little bit less equipment. Now, what you have is traditional right side up forks, non-adjustable. You also have a larger wheel than any of the other 650 classes. This is an 18-inch wheel. Most of them are going to be 17, or every other one is going to be a 17-inch wheel in the parallel twin 650 universe of Kawasaki. And I say that because there's a lot of bikes. We'll get to that in just a second. A lot of bikes in that class. But overall, it's a quality disc brake. You do have an ABS ring there, so you have ABS. And then non-spoked wheels. You do have the alloy wheels here. Going to give you a little bit more lightweight, but again, a little bit bigger wheel, that 18-inch. It is 120 wide, so although to me, visually it seems to look quite wide, it's basically the same width as a traditional sport bike everywhere it goes. And the other, or every sport bike anyways. The other difference is the profile here, if you look at the edge of the tire and the way the sidewall comes in, is much closer to a sport bike profile than you would have on other bikes. You know, the W800 would be around here. It's more of a less cruiser style bike. There's other less cruiser style tires here. So you do have a little bit of sporting character to allow for a little bit more nimble handling, but traditional stuff, cruiser stuff everywhere else. Now I criticize the brake a little bit, but in the cruiser lineup, in the cruiser competition, this is standard braking procedures. This is not, you know, different. It's just Kawasaki is so known for their sport bikes. They don't make this one as a sport bike in the same way as other bikes. Let's move our way back and talk about the motor. So looking at the heart of the bike, this is where I'm going to tell you the secret that most people aren't going to know that I just figured out because I'm running out of stuff to say about a bike that's been around for a while. So let's start with what we do know. The 650 parallel twin engine is a popular engine for Kawasaki. The Z650, the Z650 RS, the Ninja 650, the Versus 650, this bike, and I think I probably missed another one, but there's a lot of bikes that this is in. It's a super reliable engine, and they style it a little differently here. You can see these has sort of like fake air cooling vents. They're all liquid cooled. The only 650 bike in Kawasaki's lineup, street bike in Kawasaki's lineup that is not this engine is the KLR 650. Everything else 650 shares this engine. So if you like this general power band, and I've said in the past, this is almost a perfect street sport engine, but if you like this engine, you have a lot of choices in the types of bikes you can have right within the Kawasaki lineup. Now, in addition to styling this different, here's the big secret that I didn't know. I just looked at the Z650 RS, which of course shares an engine with this. Its red line is 10,000 RPM. This one is 9,500 RPM. So Kawasaki always tells us these engines are tuned slightly different depending on the bike that they're in. This one is tuned slightly different. It has a red line 500 RPM sooner than other bikes. So it probably moves that mid-range torque around a little bit, which is what they always say it does, but I always never really fully believe them. You know, a fraction of a percentage of a torque is kind of what I thought would happen, but there is a different red line on this, just a hair earlier, so it is probably tuned different. Now, one thing you're going to find here, speaking of differences, is most of the Versus, other than the Versus 650, the Z650 and all those lineups, the Ninja 650, they've actually moved on from this general frame architecture. What people don't realize is all of those bikes share pieces and parts, and you can see the Versus 650 and the Vulcan S here have the shock out to the side here. Every other bike has centralized it and changed the angle on it, but this is the way they used to do it on all of their bikes, and they've so this is still the shortest bike, the shortest height-wise in the Kawasaki lineup. 650 has this, and the tallest bike has this, where it's out to the side and not centralized. So you do have a little bit of style here to show on the rear shock, but again, a little bit less performance if you go for a pure handling bike by putting it down kind of weight centralized. So this is a little dated in some areas, but they do have down here an exhaust down here. Now really this, I thought this sort of went out a little further. I called that a little bit wrong. This still has an undermounted exhaust. All the heavy bits are down here. So even for the weight of this bike, all the heavy bits are down low. It's going to feel lighter than it actually is compared to some other bikes of similar weights, just because things like the exhaust come out and stay low. All the heavy parts are down low. So stretched out compared to the Z650s and that kind of thing. And again, a lot of weight centralized, or a lot of weight lower, but not necessarily pushed forward, which is where this shock would be more hidden if that was the case. This has a longer wheelbase, which again adds to highway stability as well. So from this angle, you can see this bike is fairly long and fairly low. Like I said, that length is going to help you in highway stability, but the overall feel of this bike is also going to help you with handling for a cruiser. But you can see that the front wheel on this is angled more out than it would be on Kawasaki's sport lineup, and you have a longer swing arm with a longer rear wheel here. So what that does is it also allows you to have a nice, very low seating position. Now this is sort of the mid seat, the mid-level seat. You have a number of options with the Vulcan S to fit someone, I think they say 5'4" to 6'4". I'm about 6 feet tall, obviously sitting here, very low to the ground, very comfortable. The bike feels nice and light. A lot of people find this to be, especially if you're a shorter person, find this to be a really logical bike to ride. Now, you have options in the foot pegs. Your feet are well forward than they would be on any other Kawasaki 650. So you could change that position, because if you're taller or shorter, the foot positions can be one of 3 different areas, and you can also change the way this handlebar is set up, and you can change the seat out depending on how tall or how short you are. So you can really customize this up whether you're tall or short. So it almost doesn't matter seeing me sit on this, because you might fit it differently. And the thing to know is if you sit on it in the showroom and it doesn't quite fit perfect, a lot of things can be changed around in here by swapping plates around in here and swapping a seat up and down and moving the handlebars a little bit. You can create more space. Now what's interesting is it's not just about creating more space or less space if you're taller or shorter. It also can really change up your seating position. If you want sort of a little bit more forward lean, if you want different foot position, you can set that up and it'll work for you as well. So overall for me, in the standard position, a typical cruiser position. This isn't my favorite position, but for a lot of people who like a cruiser, this is going to work really well. I like sitting a little bit more like this. If you like sitting a little bit more like this, The Eliminator 500 is also in Kawasaki's lineup, which does have a cruiser look, and you sit a little bit more square, and it's even lighter than this. All right, let's take a look at the gauges here. So taking a look at the gauge cluster here, you do see that Kawasaki has yet to update this to more advanced styling. Now, for some people, it's not going to matter. Turn the key here, you can see it coming on. We're going to zoom into that in just a second. For some people, this isn't going to matter, right? For some people, that cruiser style has the tachometer sort of as it is, and that's fine. You've got a digital dash that shows you everything. I will say right now, I can see in filming here that I can see this perfectly clear, but for whatever reason, the camera is almost focusing on the glass instead of the display, so it's a little less clear in person. The Eliminator 500 does have a digital display with a tachometer that looks or functions similar, but it's fully digital. So this one still stays with the older style display. Now, they did update along the way. The Vulcan S never used to have a gear indicator. It does have that now. One thing the Vulcan S doesn't have that some of the other bikes in this class do is you can cycle through some of the information. So you can see the odometers up there. We're going to cycle through trip A, trip B. We've got kilometers per liter. That's your fuel efficiency, instant fuel efficiency. That's your average fuel efficiency. And then you've got range, distance to empty, basically, and then back to odometer. So on this bike, you have to hit the button on the dash. On more modern bikes, you would have handlebar controls to do some of that, like we just showed you, or I just filmed the Z650 RS that has handlebar controls to show you a lot of the same information. But again, this works fine. You've got a fuel gauge down there. You've got the light for temperature, that kind of thing. You do have separate signal lights here, so you have the sort of, you know, some cruisers used to only have a single signal light there. You do have hazard lights as well, which I think is really nice to have. We'll talk about why I like to use them in a second here. But yeah, overall, nothing too modern, nothing too fancy. But again, price point, this bike is pretty competitive. So let's move across now to the handlebars. So taking a look at the left side handlebar here, one thing I do want to point out is this is not a slipper and assist clutch. The Vulcan S and I believe the Versus do not have the slipper assist clutch. I believe everything else in the 650 lineup does have that. So it's a little tiny bit heavier pull than some of those bikes. Again, not a heavy pull that's going to be too difficult for you. But again, it's more that traditional feel. You do have adjustable clutch lever and brake levers for both shorter and bigger hands, but also to have that grab point be exactly where you want to have it. You've got headlights, signal lights, horn, and then a different style. They moved over to a sliding four-way flasher hazard lights. Now they have a push button, or they have a push button on this bike, which is the way they've done it for years. So again, not a lot of updates here, but you do have all the functions. And hazard lights to me are very important on a bike that you could go cruising on. Maybe you're going to set up a GPS and look for things like that. This is a bike that if you had to stop and look at directions, that kind of thing, because you're traveling a long ways, this bike's comfortable enough to do that. So having those hazard lights is nice to have. One other area the Vulcan hasn't changed is you still have an incandescent light here and incandescent signals. I believe only the brake light. Let me just take a quick look here. The brake light is the only LED bike or light on the bike. Now, Kawasaki has a mixed bag of LEDs and otherwise, but the Eliminator 500, which would be the bike below this in the lineup, does have LED signals and full LED lighting. This one does not. So again, you're just seeing where Kawasaki hasn't really changed this that much. And to be fair to Kawasaki, this bike continues to sell very well for them. There's no real need to change it. They're still making their money and they're still offering you a pretty good value bike. So I kind of get why they haven't, but if you do want LED lights, that's aftermarket. That's not going to come straight from the factory from Kawasaki on this bike yet. So let's talk about why this bike might be right for you. Now, a lot of people are going to choose this bike because it is an approachable cruiser, and that's a perfectly fine reason to choose it. But I think this bike offers more than just its styling, its speed, its overall efficiency, its ease of use. A cruiser in general does give you a few options that something like a naked bike doesn't do. You'll notice to start, this one has not got a rear seat on it. You can put a rear seat through the accessories, but the other thing this is really well set up for is side bags. You can pop on some side bags onto these areas here. They're bolted on, so whether you buy them new with the bike, or if you're buying here at Wheels and Deals, you'll always have an accessories discount, so you can buy them later on as well. But you can change this from a bike where you're just gonna zip around town, zip around for a couple hours on the weekend, to a bike that can go full on touring. You could put a bigger windshield on here through the aftermarket. You could put on, like I said, side bags. You can put on a top bag type situation, a rack on here. There's all kinds of ways to equip this that allow you to go on longer trips. And that to me adds life to a bike. I'm always an advocate of versatile bikes. Now, if you want a sport bike, you got to go for a sport bike and not have a whole lot of versatility. But if you're not going for a track level sport bike, it's good to have a bike that can be versatile for you. So this cruiser style really gives you some versatility. And when I talk about this being a sporty bike, like I said, it's not going to be great on the track where you're braking super hard, diving into super tight corners. Where this is going to be good is on those typical country road corners. You're going to feel really confident in those country road corners and even just driving around town and that kind of thing. This is a better handling, lighter feeling cruiser than almost, not almost everyone, but certainly most of them out there. So it allows you something that's easy to handle in town, comfortable on the highway, and because of this nice cushy seat, you have a lot of space there to make it comfortable for you on longer trips. Once you start going longer trips, you may want to add luggage. If you do that, you can do that on this bike. And again, from a power perspective, the Eliminator 500 is a great little bike because it's so light, but this 650 is going to have more torque. So you're going to have that pulling power. You're going to have the ability, I've toured on this same engine on the Versa 650, which is a much heavier bike, so it probably has more wind resistance, and it is a perfect engine to do sporty touring on, and that's what you get in this bike here. So while it can't lean over as far as something like a Ninja 650, for most riders, that's going to be absolutely fine. You're still going to enjoy all those country roads, all that exploring, all of that sort of true motorcycle freedom that you could want in a bike like this. What I wouldn't do is take this off-road, but you probably already knew that. So there you go. There's the Vulcan S for 2025. Still, even without its updates, one of the best, sportier, lighter weight, versatile cruisers you can get, and I still think it's well worth buying. There is a cafe model. It's got some new colors this year. You have to come check it out. They're all sitting here at Jim Gilbert's Power Sports. Again, if you want me to review the cafe model, I'll come back and do that. Just let me know. Thanks everybody for making it this far in the video. If you watched this far, I appreciate it. Make sure you hit the subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll talk to you in the next one.